Welcome to episode 6 of the Goblincast. In today's video and podcast, we're going to be talking about a lot of the northern plot lines. Firstly, we're going to be talking about if Mance Rayder wrote the pink letter, breaking down all the reasons maybe he did or did not write it. The second part, we'll be talking about when did Roose Bolton officially turn on Robb Stark? When did he officially start plotting the Red Wedding and things like that? And lastly, we'll be looking at the character of Barbrey Dustin and where do her true loyalties lie? Breaking down if she'll betray the Boltons and go to the Starks. What is she going to do in the Winds of Winter? So, hope you guys all enjoy this discussion video on the North, and feel free to add to the discussion in the comments. I think as the years go by, and maybe this is just, I like the theory more and more, I have started to subscribe to this theory. I do believe that Mance Rayder now wrote the pink letter. I would say I'm like, maybe last year I was like 50-50 on it between Mance and Ramsay. I'd say I'm more like 60-40 that Mance wrote the letter. But we're going to go through the text. We're going to break down each of the lines, provide some of the evidence for the theory and even some of it against the theory, because I really don't think there's a one person that is a concrete shoe-in for who wrote the pink letter. And so we're going to talk about all of that in today's video. Let me know before we start the video, what do you think about Mance writing the pink letter? Do you think it makes sense? So let's start the video with reading what is stated in the pink letter. It is stated that your false king is dead, bastard. He and all his hosts were smashed in 7 days of battle. I have his magic sword, tell his red whore. Your false king's friends are dead, their heads upon the walls of Winterfell. Come see them, bastard. Your false king lied, and so did you. You told the world you burned the king beyond the wall. Instead, you sent him to Winterfell to steal my bride. I will have my bride back. If you want Mance Rayder back, come and get him. I have him in a cage for all the north to see. Proof of your lies. The cage is cold, but I have made him a warm cloak from the skins of the 6 whores who came with him to Winterfell. I want my bride back. I want the false king's queen. I want his daughter and his red witch. I want this wildling princess. I want his little prince, the wildling babe, and I want my reek. Send them to me, bastard, and I will not trouble you or your black crows. Keep them from me, and I will cut out your bastard's heart and eat it. Ramsay Bolton, true-born lord of Winterfell. Also to note about this letter is that it is addressed to Bastard and is sealed with a smear of pink sealing wax, which is used by House Bolton. Now, even though it is in that kind of wax that would indicate House Bolton, it doesn't seem to have their sigil. It doesn't actually seem to have that stamp of officialness. And so there's been a lot of questions about that. Why does this letter seem so suspicious? So I want to look at the kind of this first line. So this first line indicates this idea of Stannis being called a false king. Now, nobody says that really of Stannis outside of, we hear this term at the beginning of A Dance with Dragons when Melisandre specifically is talking about Mance being this false king into the wildling. We don't really hear anyone else saying those specific words, especially not Ramsay, and this is used quite a lot. And when you think about the last time we really hear this idea of a false king with Mance's death and how that's kind of used in Mance's supposed death, right? We know he doesn't actually die, but his public death to the people, that's used quite a lot. And when you think about how this, starts, your false king is dead, bastard. It kind of references, I believe, the initial burning for Mance. And so I think that's apparent right away. The language does not match Ramsay whatsoever at certain points of this letter. And I think the terminology of false king does not match Ramsay at all. Now, the next part of it is, bastard. And I think this is a contentious one, but the language is weird here. Ramsay, within A Dance with Dragons, puts someone to death because of being called a bastard. So it's weird to think about this. Is Ramsay using that insecurity onto Jon, knowing that it will provoke him? But it also seems weird as an insult because every time he's going to be writing down bastard, he also might think of himself. So I don't know how I feel about this language one. I think that Mance specifically would know that bastard would rub him the wrong way. Because you think about Mance and Jon's first conversation, the way that Jon is able to convince Mance that he is becoming a wildling, that he's breaking free from the Night's Watch, is because of at that meeting back in Jon 1 in a Game of Thrones when he's with Benjen and he's the back of the hall. He talks about his bastardry and how that has placed him there and how that led him to where he is. that's something that Mance would have a deep connection and understand that that's a major motivator for Jon. Ramsay, on the other hand, it is questionable when you think about his own insecurities with being a bastard. Would he use that language or not? And so that's something I think that you also have to question. So the next line, is very confusing because it doesn't seem to make any sense. It says, he and all his host were smashed in 7 days of battle. I have his magic sword, tell his red whore. So this seems to be indicating that this is a direct message to Melisandre. Now, if this is from Ramsay, it's more like a threat type situation. But if it's Mance, it could be indicating, okay, Melisandre knows Mance much better than Jon does in terms of, they've been together doing this magic type stuff for a while. Melisandre is somebody that's, fairly decent as interpretation. And so if it is Mance, and the way I think it is, this is meant to be a message. But also think about it from this idea. We know for a fact that if Stannis is going to lose, it's not going to be 7 days of battle. That's just not going to happen, right? If Stannis is going to lose, he's going to lose rather quickly, right? And so that line just doesn't make sense. We know that is fabrication. Now, could it be a message to Melisandre saying Stannis is not doing all that good? He's out here starving. He isn't able really to siege Winterfell whatsoever, and all of that. That definitely could be the case, right? Again, false king comes up again when the next line where he says, your false king's friends are dead, their heads upon the walls of Winterfell. I kind of question this. How would Ramsay expect Jon to know some of the information that's being kind of relayed here? And that's something I think about a lot here is, you think about certain lines like he wants his reek back and some of the information about like Mance. How would Ramsay expect Jon to know those things? And so why are they relevant? There's just so much information here that it would make more sense if it came from Mance to Jon specifically, or even Mel, than it would for Ramsay. And you even think about the way that this is kind of started to write and how it's being written. It seems like a poetic, like threatening letter. It fits the way Mance is as a character, right? He is somebody pretending to be this bard. He's somebody that likes songs and poems and things like that. But also this could be a plead for help, right? If Mance is using code to tell Melisandre that yes, he is basically trapped at Winterfell and all of his spearwives are dead. And then we continue saying, come see them, bastard. Your false king lied, and so did you. You told the world you burned the king beyond the wall. Instead, you sent him to Winterfell to steal my bride from me. Again, this is a lot to implicate on Jon, and maybe it's Ramsay overstepping, but again, there's a lot of information here that wouldn't necessarily need to be relevant if it was from Ramsay. Now, another part of this that I think is interesting is the messaging here. Come to Winterfell. I think this could be more that Mance is shouting for help, right? After telling the situation, giving an update to Melisandre, if she was to read this, she may come to a different conclusion, right? That Stannis needs help and that Mance needs help getting out of Winterfell. But you also think about the idea that your false king lied, and so did you. If you think about Mance's burning, it was said that he died there, but he didn't. Mance was glamored and he's still living. And so that's something that's really interesting because, again, it goes on to say you told the world you burned the king beyond the wall, referencing the chapter that I'm bringing up, but instead you sent him to Winterfell. So, again, there's a lot of information here that Mance would definitely know, and it seems to have a lot of symbolic parallels to when Mance was supposedly burned at the beginning of A Dance with Dragons. I think this is another part of this that's very interesting. As we get the next line, I will have my bride back. If you want Mance Rayder back, come and get him. I have him in a cage for all the north to see, proof of your lies. The cage is cold, but I have made him a warm cloak from the skins of the 6 whores who came with him to Winterfell. Now this does sound a bit like Ramsay, and I want to point this out. The threats that are made here are things that Ramsay says in a chapter in A Dance with Dragons in Mance's presence. That to me is very interesting then, that the thing that is threatened, right, and what is said about Mance and what all that happens is something that we hear kind of similar things about from Ramsay earlier on in the story. I think that's very important. But another part of this, if we look at this entire letter, the only person that is named by their name, not by a title or, whoever they're related to or whatever, is Mance. It's the only person outside of the signature of Ramsay at the bottom that has a name. That to me is striking because if I was reading this letter, I'd go, whoa, why is Mance Rayder like in, full caps and bolded and everybody else is kind of a footnote? I think this is somewhat of a coded message Mance trying to make it obvious and clear that he is trapped within Winterfell and is kind of asking for help. The letter continues, I want my bride back. I want the false king's queen. I want his daughter and his red witch. I want this wildling princess. I want his little prince, the wildling babe. And I want my Reek. Now, again, I've talked about this already. Jon doesn't know who Reek is. So why would Ramsay say that to Jon? That just doesn't make any sense. And also, if you think about where Ramsay would even think that Reek and also Jane Poole are at this point, they are not with Jon. So this letter doesn't make any sense when you think about it from, Ramsay's point of view. Ramsay knows that none of those people are there. And also the fact that, again, if Jon was to try and deliver this queen, again, Selyse and Shireen, that would bring up a whole battle. So none of these claims seem to make any sense, but the two that I find are very interesting in Val and then Mance's son, well, those are because Mance wants to be reunited with his family and things like that. That would make sense that Mance would want to get them there. And so I look at this and I go, this is a weird request. Why would Ramsay request certain people from Jon that he knows Jon just clearly does not have at this time? And so that to me is suspicious right away. We finish out the letter saying, send them to me, bastard, and I will not trouble you or your black crows. That we got to pause for that line right away. Black crows is something that is never referenced by Ramsay, the North. This is not a common term in terms of Westeros. They do not say that language. That language is a specific wildling kind of phrase. It's said by Ygritte, Mance, Tormund. That is something that is never said by Ramsay, and it makes no sense at the bottom of this letter. And so that's my thing, is that certain parts of this make sense and why it could be Ramsay, but then you look at other parts and you go, Black Crows? That doesn't make much sense at all. It almost feels like this whole letter, as we get to the bottom of it, right, is keep them from me and I will cut out your bastard's heart and eat it. I want to reference that as well. All of this sounds like someone trying to impersonate someone, because on a surface level, on probably your first read, and even me, I believe Ramsay wrote this for a good amount of time, and I still think it's a possibility. It feels like somebody's trying to impersonate Ramsay. Whether you believe that's Mance, whether you believe that's somebody else, it is interesting. But I also want to reference the last line. So the last line with the, I will cut out your bastard's heart and eat it, is something that Mance references to Jon in the books. When speaking on the issue of Jon and becoming a wildling, this is said. Steer scowled, his heart may still be black. Then cut it out, Mance turned to Rattleshirt. Does that not seem a lot like the threat made here? Keep them from me and I will cut out your bastard's heart and eat it. This is almost like word for word what is said in this Mance quote. And so I look at this and I go, this letter is very puzzling because it has a lot of language that we've seen a character like Mance use, wildling type of language. Very interesting. And I think that is a big part of it. Now, there's some other stuff here that is interesting. Why would Mance be trying to get Jon's help? Well, one, he wants to get the wildlings to probably come south. Two, he needs the help. I think if Mance is the author of this letter, he has to have probably escaped to the crypts, given that we've already seen that happen before with someone like Bran or Rickon. It'd be a great parallel to that. But I think Mance also would be thinking big picture. Stannis, from all the information he knows, is not doing well, and it's likely that Stannis could lose the battle. If Stannis loses the battle, then Mance is screwed. The Boltons will never let the wildlings be freed, south of the wall. This could mean the literal extermination of his people. And so when you think about the situation, the best case scenario for Mance is that Stannis wins. For one, because he actually treats the wildlings favorably, and also for Jon to live and to continue on. And so I don't think the purpose of this letter is for Mance to cause chaos at the Night's Watch, at the Wall, and to get Jon killed. It was out of desperation, right? Given the information that Mance knows. And so I think Mance has all the motivation there to execute this plan, for this letter to make sense for Mance to do. But the thing I think that holds this theory back is the actual execution. How did Mance write this letter when the last time we see him, things were going extremely poorly, right? A number of his spearwives have already been killed. Yes, Theon and Jane Poole do escape, but Mance would be in a really tough position. So how did he then get a maester to send this letter, some pink wax to, again, stamp the letter, and then write this so accurately to where it would be, perceived as Ramsay? It's kind of tough, right? I think that's the one thing that holds back the theory. I think that if you look at the letter itself and the writing of it, I think if you look at the motivations, everything is there, but the execution to me is something we just don't know enough about. Because we leave Winterfell at the point that we do in A Dance with Dragons, it's hard to really figure out if Mance had the means to be able to do what he does for this pink letter to make sense. And so that's kind of my video on Mance Rayder as a whole. Let me know what you guys think about his writing of the pink letter. I think it's a very strong case. It could be him. It would also fulfill the idea of what does Mance still have left to add to the story. He could be a major factor in the way the northern politics play out, with Jon hopefully being revived and then coming south, and how that all shapes out. It could also be a huge help to Stannis. So we'll just have to see. Again, this theory is one of the most discussed theories in A Song of Ice and Fire for good reason. And I think one of the reasons that is because, well, we didn't get to see the battle for Winterfell, or I should say the Battle of Ice, the beginning of A Dance with Dragons. And the way we leave the North plot in that book in A Dance with Dragons, very mysterious, very much open for interpretation, a lot of different characters maneuvering around. So I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. I know other people think people like Wyman Manderly, Stannis, Ramsay himself could have been behind it. When did Roose truly turn against Robb Stark and his cause? Is there a simple answer, or was it that he was always planning to? That's the question of today's video. Before we get into it, let me know, when do you think Roose fully began to act against Robb? Now, this is, I think, a difficult question to ask, because I think from the very onset, Roose was somebody always working in his own self-interest. From the moment that Robb called his banners, yes, Roose went along with it, but he was always working in his own self-interest. Even when we get towards the end of Book 1, Roose is given command of basically all of Robb's foot, more or less, to go attack, or really to distract, Tywin in the Battle of the Green Fork. And in this battle, Roose is very cautious. He very easily could have surprised the Lannisters, as Tyrion even notes, but he seems to wait for the Lannisters to come to battle. If Roose wanted to, he could have very easily and maybe even won the Battle of the Green Fork if he had attacked more swiftly. But Roose was cautious. He didn't want to drain his own strength. Even in the Battle of the Green Fork, most of the casualties and losses are not Bolton men. It isn't even Roose's, main supporters. It's a lot of the other men. And that comes into a major factor, because I think Roose was thinking this whole time, hey, if Robb wins, great, right? The North will get more prestige and we'll get more, resources from looting and all this stuff. But if he loses, which could be, likely, given the fact that Roose is smart enough to realize nobody is ever going to let the North and the Riverlands become separate from the kingdoms. Whether it's Renly, Stannis, or Joffrey, Robb is still going to be a threat regardless. And so if you're Roose, even at this point, you're not fully acting against Robb to bring him down, but you're putting yourself in a good position. Of all of Robb's bannermen, you're going to increase in your strength and size, while everybody else slowly trickles their forces down a bit. That's something that Roose completely understood. And so I don't think this is the point when he turns against Robb, but I think he was using his own self-interest. You even think about how people describe him as being very cautiously, he was moving towards Harrenhal. And then eventually he does take Harrenhal with bribing the brave companions. And so even at this point, Roose is somewhat acting still under Robb. But here is where things start to get a little murky, because a lot of things happen that go wrong for Robb's campaign. The first of these major issues is that Winterfell is taken. I guess there's a lot of things that culminate all at the same time. As when I read the quote about when I really think Roose Bolton fully turned against Robb, there's a lot of things that are going on. At one point, you have, again, that Bran and Rickon are presumed dead. Theon has taken the castle, and it eventually does get sacked by Ramsay, albeit it's said that it was put to the torch by the Greyjoys and the Ironborn. So Winterfell falls. The North has fallen, so Robb can't get back to the North at this point, and his own homeland is under attack by the Ironborn. On the other part of that, Stannis, who looked like he was going to win the Battle of the Blackwater Bay, is defeated by Tywin, who has this major alliance with the Tyrells. So all of a sudden, Stannis is defeated, Renly is dead, Joffrey now has the support of not only all of Tywin's forces that were already an equal match for Robb, but also has the Tyrells. Meanwhile, the Starks themselves can't even defend their own homeland. And this all trickles over when we finally get that he actually marries Jane Westerling, not Rosalind Frey or whatever Frey he was eventually going to marry. So this is a really influential part of the last part of the story. At what point did Roose decide the game's up? We need to switch sides. So this comes from an Arya chapter in A Clash of Kings where they discuss the exact thing I'm talking about and where we see the seeds of the Frey-Bolton alliance. Sir Harris High, who was a Frey on his mother's side, nodded vigorously. If Lord Tywin could defeat a seasoned man like Stannis Baratheon, what chance will our boy king have against him? He looked round to his brothers and cousins for support, and several of them muttered agreement. Someone must have the courage to say it. Sir Hoston said, "The war is lost. King Robb must be made to see that." Roose Bolton studied him with pale eyes. His grace has defeated the Lannisters every time he has faced them in battle. He has lost the North, insisted Hostine Frey. He has lost Winterfell. His brothers are dead. Skipping past Arya's reaction to this, the conversation continues. Had Stannis won, all might have been different, Ronald Rivers said wistfully. He was one of Lord Walder's bastards. Stannis lost, Sir Hoston said bluntly. Wishing it were otherwise will not make it so. King Robb must make peace with the Lannisters. He must pull off his crown and bend the knee a little as he may like it. And who will tell him so? Roose Bolton smiled. It's a fine thing to have so many valiant brothers in such troubled times. I shall think on all you've said. At this point, this is where I think Roose has basically confirmed he's going to undermine Robb and go against him. At this point, everything is turning against him at this time. There is nothing left to Robb's campaign. Everybody can see it. The writing is on the wall. And so I think for me personally, this makes the most amount of sense. Others may suggest that maybe maybe a couple chapters later when Tywin is able to actually contact Roose, does he fully turn to like a Red Wedding plan? But I think at this point, Roose saw the writing on the wall. He knew that the North needed to bend the knee, and if Robb wasn't going to do so, he could put himself in a prime position to take over the power of the North, because he's already buddy-buddy with the Freys, who are one of the most powerful houses in the Riverlands, if not the most outside of like the Tullys, for instance. And so at this point, Roose Bolton knows what's going to happen, right? He knows what's going to happen, and he doesn't need to see any more. And so I think for me personally, the point of when I think Roose turned was at Harrenhal in Arya's chapter. We literally saw it happening in front of Arya's eyes, but didn't really see it happening. Just think about the way Roose Bolton reacts to this information. Roose isn't upset by this, disturbed of this news that the Freys want to, bend the knee and all this stuff. Roose Bolton smiles. Everything's going into place. Roose himself has barely lost any men and has only gained power himself. And if you even go further, he thinks about having to think about it. But we know Roose already knows what he's going to do. So to me, I think this is the clear indication of Roose turning against Robb. He's been undermining him in his own subtle ways, but I think the nail gets driven into the coffin when he orders some of the other northern lords with a lot of Robb's foot to attack Duskendale. It makes no sense. It has no value. Robb, when he hears the news, is basically shocked by this. It's a word that brings a curse to his lips. It is really the major defeat for the North, but Robb had nothing to do with it. We're going to be revisiting the character of Barbrey Dustin. I feel like I've talked about this character a number of times, and each time I just feel like I have new thoughts and different things that I want to talk about with the character. And in today's video, I want to look at what is she really playing at? Whose side is she on? Is she really a Bolton loyalist? Is she really a Stark lover like Wyman Manderley? Is she somewhere in the middle? Who is Barbrey Dustin? And let's look at some of the events that happened during A Dance with Dragons and even her backstory and try to figure out who this character really is backing in The Winds of Winter and even A Dance with Dragons as a whole as well. So let's start off with a little bit of Barbrey Dustin's backstory. So Barbrey Dustin has this very conflicting backstory with the Starks. And it's very interesting because on one hand, she loved and it seemed like she had an affair with Brandon Stark. Her father was trying to marry her to Brandon Stark and then even later to Ned Stark as well. None of those end up going well because of, well, Southern ambitions. Everything kind of boils down to that. For the North during the Robert Rebellion era, It was unprecedented for the North to get so involved in the South in terms of marriage alliances, all of that type of stuff. And so Barbrey Dustin has a grudge for Rickard Stark and also the Maester, but then later also with Ned, because Barbrey Dustin ends up losing her husband, and she loses her husband at the Tower of Joy, and Ned never brings back his bones. Ned buries him at the Tower of Joy along with everybody else that allegedly died there. So Barbrey Dustin holds this kind of grudge against Ned because, well, Ned brought his sister's bones back, but not the loyal men that died for him and his sister. It's not a great look for somebody like Barbrey Dustin, who had already been slighted by them once. Now she's slighted by them a second time. So that is some of the motivation right away, where why does Barbrey Dustin not like the Starks all that much? And that's what she tells Theon. And a lot of that comes down to this great quote that we see between Theon and Barbrey Dustin in the crypts, where Barbrey Dustin's talking to Theon about wanting to be a Stark and how they actually have more in common than they might think. And it's a great moment. I love Theon's plotline mainly because Theon's a great character. He has a great supporting cast in his plotline, and Barbrey Dustin is one of those. So that's part of it. Now we also have to look at the other side of this backstory that connects Barbrey to the Boltons, which again is very conflicting. And on one hand, Barbrey Dustin loves certain Boltons and she hates certain Boltons. Same idea as the Starks. So Barbrey has a number of connections to the Boltons. So one of those being that her sister actually was the second wife of Roose Bolton and actually was the mother of Domeric Bolton. Now Domeric Bolton was very close to Barbrey Dustin, almost like a son to her. And Barbrey really liked him. And the problem with that is, allegedly, Ramsay Bolton killed Domeric Bolton, which I believe is the most likely outcome. So Barbrey Dustin holds a grudge over Ramsay for that. But then it also gets worse, because Barbrey Dustin is very much aware of what seems to have happened with Lady Hornwood and the awful treatment that she was given by Ramsay. This is even further expanded upon in A Dance with Dragons when Barbrey is not willing to basically house Ramsay because she hates him that much. It's also, in my opinion, another reason why she also takes an interest in pity in Theon, but we'll get to the Theon connection a little bit later because I still want to build up the background. So, on one fell swoop, you have a connection with the Boltons and the Starks for Barbrey Dustin. She has a very good familiar relationship with both families. But in both cases, she has certain family members in those families that she loves, and certain ones she absolutely despises and hates. So who does Barbrey truly support? Well, it's a tough question, because when we get to the main story, when we finally see her in the final book that we've gotten so far, she very much seems to be a staunch Bolton ally. She's one of the first people to back Roose Bolton. She's even willing to basically put on the marriage between Ramsay and the fake Arya. She's willing to take control of that. It's a really big thing of showing that Barbrey is loyal to Roose. And that eventually doesn't actually happen because Stannis leaves the wall. Roose wants to get to Winterfell, kind of make it more official, right? Have this wedding with this Arya character at Winterfell in her home to make it seem more legit. But I want to point this out right away. Like I mentioned earlier, Barbrey doesn't want to even house Ramsay whatsoever. And there's another part of this that I think is fascinating. So Barbrey says that if she ever finds Ned's bones, she's going to make sure that they never reach Winterfell, any of that stuff. And Barbrey very makes it publicly known. She has a very public motivation as to why she goes with Roose and the Boltons, because she hates the Starks. I think it's very convenient, though, given the fact that we know she did love a Stark, and it's kind of weird that she would blame all of House Stark for things that Rickard and Ned did. And I think that's interesting because when we look at Barbrey's actions, when we get to, for instance, the marriage between Ramsay and fake Arya, aka Jane Poole, it seems like Barbrey Dustin realizes this is not the real Arya. And again, it's not that hard to figure out, in my opinion. And a lot of the reasons that that marriage is working for Roose, or was going to, is because Roose held all the power. Nobody was going to question it. But Barbrey is somebody that takes over, for instance, housing and or, preparing Jane Poole for the marriage. She takes a keen interest in that. And there's another thing that I find to be very interesting is Barbrey Dustin wants to go to the crypts. Now, the surface value reason is, well, she wants to go down there to see Brandon Stark. And it really mirrors, in my opinion, Actually, when Robert and Ned go down to the crypts early on in a Game of Thrones in the first couple chapters. And say this for a number of reasons, because it's kind of like this pretense to go down there, right? To see a loved one, somebody that you loved in Barbrey Dustin loving Brandon Stark. But then it kind of goes a different route. It's a lot about talking about Theon and his identity. It's also then talking about the crypts, but then finding these missing swords. There's a lot of attention drawn to it. And you got to also remember, Wyman Manderley has kind of just revealed that he understands that Rickon and Bran are alive, and he gives his whole mission to Davos, and he finds this story from Wex. So I believe personally, what you could be seeing is that Barbrey Dustin actually gets involved with the Grand Northern Conspiracy and is actually using her whole alias of hating the Starks as kind of a cover. Because you might be thinking, well, why then would Barbrey Dustin not want to go with the Boltons if she seems so cocksure in backing them? Well, she doesn't necessarily. Like publicly, she does, but to even Theon, she shows that she's not really backing the Boltons outside of just kind of fearing Roose Bolton. Roose Bolton is somebody that is kind of a very evil, kind of fearful person. Everybody seems to just not want to mess with him type scenario. And we see that when she basically is like looking at Roose Bolton and how he's eyeing up everybody, and he knows that, they could be unloyal and things of that nature. Like he's suspicious of Wyman Manderley, waiting until Wyman Manderley eats something for him to eat it just so it's not poison. That shows how suspicious he is. And it's very interesting because Theon brings up how Barbrey Dustin could be a huge threat to the Boltons. And Barbrey Dustin is like, yeah, I could be. And that's what I think is really interesting, is that you have the motivation of Barbrey Dustin hating somebody that is currently in the room. Because think about the situation. If Roose was to die at any point in the coming battle, well, Ramsay would be the person that would eventually take over House Bolton. And that's somebody that Barbrey hates. So why would she back the Boltons when, as of right now, the options are between one, Roose is going to give birth to a Frey child, or two, it's going to go to Ramsay Bolton. And remember, Barbrey Dustin at the end of A Dance with Dragons also hates the Freys. She brings up this whole thing saying, Barrowman also died at the Twins. Everybody hates you here. It isn't just, the Manderleys. It's everyone. The North, remember, she has her own, like, Wyman Manderley speech, but it's even more, Wyman's is pretty hard to beat. It's my favorite chapter of Dance with Dragons, but hers is almost like even more badass because it's saying it straight up to the Freys, saying it right to their faces. So you have this connection where Barbrey hates the Freys. She has reasons to not like the Boltons, and yet we're supposed to believe that she's backing Roose. At best, I think Barbrey Dustin is playing the field. She's just playing with Roose's side until things start going bad, because she realizes having Roose in control of the North is not a good thing. Roose is not a, likable person, a good person to have as the ruler of the entire North, and she's probably going to realize, even if it's not immediately, let's even say that Roose is able to beat Stannis, it's likely Roose is never going to be able to hold the North. The North eventually is going to just overturn him. And so for Barbrey, I look at it like this. It isn't that, okay, that she then loves the Starks. Because she hates the Boltons, the Freys, that doesn't mean she loves the Starks, but I could see it as it's a lesser of two evils, right? And if the Stark faction is gaining more power as every day goes by, whether that's with, maybe this Umber Manderley alliance, and you also have the Glovers being involved in this alliance. If Barbrey Dustin puts her power into that, plus with Stannis here, it's not looking good. And especially when you think about what just happened. So Roose Bolton sends out the Freys, the Manderleys. The Freys are likely going to lose their battle, and their forces are going to be decimated. Well, that's not good for Roose. A lot of Roose's main power is between his own forces with the Dreadfort men, and then also the Frey force. If the Frey force gets wiped off the earth, well, things are looking quite badly, because Barbrey Dustin within Winterfell is that tipping faction. She is the one that could decide the full outcome of what happens. So I think Barbrey Dustin, in my opinion, the conclusion I've come to upon reevaluating her character and where I am with the character is she's playing her own game in terms of what is the safer option, what's going to keep her safe, what's going to keep, her people safe, her family safe, and what is best in her own self-interest. I don't think it has anything to do with how Wyman Manderley is like the Mannerleys have a lot to owe the Starks, all that stuff because they're tied histories and they have a deep loyalty to them. I don't think it's that at all. I think that it's Barbrey Dustin is very clever. I think she's very intelligent. I think she sees the way the war is going. And at first, it made a lot of sense to back Roose Bolton because he was the person in power. He was the person that you want to support. But as that power is waning, as the situation is growing worse and worse and worse for Roose, Barbrey Dustin has a perfect chance to switch sides. If she's not already done that, or at least is fielding both sides right now. So that's kind of where I've come to. Now, you might also be wondering, why would somebody involve Barbrey Dustin in the entire Grand Northern Conspiracy? And a lot of it just goes back to what I just said. Barbrey Dustin, albeit on face value, he has a lot of reasons to go with Roose. There's a lot of reasons that she wouldn't want to go with Roose, and that's quite clear as well. And I don't think Roose is like oblivious to this either. Like Barbrey Dustin literally says, yeah, Roose tries to treat me nicely. He tries to keep me, well loved, all that kind of stuff to keep Barbrey Dustin on his side. And I think that's very true. I think that Roose is not stupid. Roose realizes the situation. So let me know what you guys think about Barbrey Dustin. I think I didn't really, go into predicting her character in Winds of Winter because I've done that in the past. But I wanted to just evaluate the character from what we've gotten in Dance with Dragons and what we're probably going to see in the Winds of Winter. She could have a very big role in the fall of Roose and Ramsay Bolton, which would, I think, be very satisfying given how Barbrey Dustin hates Ramsay so much. It would be awesome to see a combination of Barbrey Dustin, Wyman Manderley, and Theon, alongside of Stannis, of course, be able to take down the Boltons. That would be super cool, but we'll see what happens. And I hope you guys all enjoyed the video. I'll see you guys all in the next one. Bye, guys.